Hello, this is an online version of my sermon for the beginning of Pesach. It's intended for those people who won't make it to shul on Sunday, the first day of Yom Tov. So if you are planning to be in shul, please don't listen to this until afterwards. Here's a thought about Matzah, the key symbol of Pesach, the focus of the Seder. Matzah, despite its simplicity, is actually a very complex entity. And it articulates a conflict and a tension which is evident within the text of the Haggadah itself. Here are two very familiar passages. The first we say just at the beginning of the story. We've made Kiddush, we've washed our hands, we've eaten karpas, we've broken the matzah, and before we say Manishtama and begin the story in earnest, we take the matzah and we declare Holach Ma'anya Diacholo Avosono Ba'aret Mitzrayim. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. It's Lechem Oini, the bread of affliction. But at the end of Magid, soon before the meal, we ask, why do we eat the matzah? And we say we eat matzah because our ancestors were driven out of Egypt and they did not have time for their bread to bake. But that's about redemption. It's not about the food they ate in Egypt. So which is it? Is it a symbol of slavery, holach ma'anyo, or is it a symbol of liberation, ki gorshu Mitzrayim, for they were expelled from Egypt and they had to bake in haste? This confusion, in fact, is reflected in the Pesukim, the verses themselves, where there seem to be references to matzah prior to the Exodus, matzah at the time of the Exodus, and in Devarim, lechem oni, the bread, this word oni, either means something which is of affliction, or the rabbis understand the bread over which you will tell the story, over which many things are said. It's not a new question how to understand matzah and how one very simple item can appear to have two conflicting symbolic properties. The Maaseh Hashem of Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi, a very early commentary in the Haggadah, suggests that there are indeed two types of matzah. There's the matzah we eat during the week of Pesach, that's about slavery, and there's the matzah we eat at the Seder, and that talks about redemption, and it's a reenactment of the haste of departure from Egypt. That's one possibility. The Abu Dharam, also a late medieval source, says that there's two types of haste. There's the haste required by slaves to eat their food quickly, and that is a portent of the haste with which they left Egypt. So they're two related symbols. The Sforno, writing in Italy rather later, connects the two understandings of matzah to external pressure. Lechem oni, the poor man's bread, or if you like, the bread of affliction, is about having no time to oneself. Slaves who are under pressure from others, there's always some external force that controls what happens. So they have to eat quick, hastily baked food while they're in Egypt, snatching a meal between the next one slave duty and another. And that, as it were, leads into the idea of chipazon. Why do they have to leave Egypt? Because they're forced out. Again, have to hurry their food because of some external pressure. And the Sforno says this represents the transformation of something negative into something positive. There's a transformation of that haste of the slave experience into the haste of exile. And he quotes a verse from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah, "V'hofachti evlom l'soson," and I will transform their mourning into rejoicing. The haste becomes something of sadness that becomes happy. These are all clever interpretations, but I'd like to go on a rather different route and consider a different sort of transformation. Rav Soloveitchik notes that in the Rambam's Haggadah and in others, just before we say Holach Ma'anyo, and it appears in Sfaradi Haggadahs, but not the ones that Ashkenazim use, the phrase appears, Bivhilu Yotsono Mitzrayim. We had to leave Egypt in haste, and that means that right at the beginning, both reasons for matzah are given, both the poor man's bread in Egypt and also the haste with which they would leave. They're both mentioned at the outset, and I actually don't know why this is missing from Ashkenazi Haggadahs. But I would like to point out two other differences between the matzah referred to at Holach Ma'anya at the beginning of the Seder and the matzah referred to later on at the end. The first, the matzah is broken. You require a broken matzah, and in the second we require a whole matzah. That's one distinction. Another is that the matzah that's left open is simply left there. It's a symbol. Whereas the matzah at the end of the Seder is actually eaten. One is external, one is internal. And I think that this represents a journey, an internal journey from slavery to liberation. Now, we start by thinking about the external forces as referred to by the Sforno, which require us to behave in a certain way, but it's really an internal narrative. The broken symbol of the matzah is the unfinished self, a sense of isolation, an internal sense of disassociation, and importantly fragmentation, hence the broken piece. It is a world of emotional and intellectual exile, as well as one, of course, of physical exile. And then there's a route through the story, a route to wholeness, connection, and integration. That route is long and hard, but we get there in the end. And of course, we move from a symbol that is broken and external to one that is whole and internalized by eating. The key message of this is that it's a self-guided personal journey, that the outside forces that control our lives or allow us to be free are really something which we should internalize and treat as our own journey. Liberation is an internal process. It might be modeled on external processes, but ultimately it's the same self, the same matzah, the same person that can journey from slavery to liberation. And so we start, as it were, with the awareness of brokenness. It's uneaten, it's cracked, it's fragmented. And we note, Bifhilu Yotzonu Mitzrayim, we raced out of Egypt, and then we proceed through a tough, arduous, emotional journey to wholeness, and eventually eating and integrating the symbol. And only matzah, the simplest food, can symbolize both. And this, of course, is the meaning of the bracha, which you say, the passage which is said very close to the end of the Haggadah. Once we completed that journey, we'll begin the celebratory part of the Seder, which leads us to describe the matzah in positive terms and eventually eat it. We say that God, Hotzionu, me avdus lecherus, God brought us out from slavery to freedom, miyogoin lesimcha, from woe to joy, ume'eva leyom tov, from mourning to festivity, ume'afelo la'or gadol, from darkness to great light, umishibud ligeula, but ultimately from enslavement to redemption. And when we reach that stage, v'nomer lefonov shira chadashah, let's say before God a new song, meaning we feel capable of experiencing and celebrating that transformation which has taken place through our experience and proper understanding and internalization of the ideas inherent in matzah. Wishing you all Chag Kosher v'Sameach, sei gesund und stark, and wonderful Sidorim.